Well, good afternoon, Park Church. It is September 6th, and this is your pastor's midweek moment. Well, recently I was scrolling, believe it or not, on my phone through YouTube, and I came across an old interview. And the interview was with the famous Buzz Aldrin. And if you're unfamiliar with Aldrin, he was a former American astronaut and the pilot of the 1969 Apollo 11 mission. And Aldrin was also the second person to walk on the moon, only after mission commander Neil Armstrong. So he's a pretty popular guy and has done some probably very amazing things in history. And in this interview that I was watching, Aldrin shared in the video that the video we saw of that original landing on the moon back in 1969 was actually a simulation. The audio recording was real, and it was recorded live and broadcast live, but it was overlaid on top of a simulation just for the viewer's comprehension. And this answered a lot of questions that I had about that original moon landing and all that sort of stuff. But I guess if you were watching it in 1969, that generation knew what they were seeing. But it was in fact just a simulation. The audio was real, and it was offered in real time. Nevertheless, I've often wondered, as I looked at this moon landing and all that sort of stuff, what it took to accomplish such a task. How can humanity bridge the gap of space and set foot on another planet, or in this case, the moon? What does it take for man to reach the heavens? Well, thankfully, NASA showed us the way to do it. Remember that quote right now, the way to do it. It took a team. It took a team, NASA, of tons of, probably hundreds of engineers and construction workers and fabricators and communications specialists, all that sort of stuff to accomplish it. It took wisdom and knowledge, lots of engineering and many years to do it. It took processes. There had to be a flight plan and an understanding of trajectory and route and what to do step by step. It took a method of transportation. They needed a spaceship. They needed it designed, and they needed a good spaceship that could carry them and keep them safe to the moon. It took resources. Believe it or not, in 1969 and the years leading up to it, it took $28 billion to land on the moon. That's what it took to put feet on the ground on the moon. And if you're to look at the equivalency today, the equivalency would be 280 billion, so roughly 10 times the price than in 1969. And all of these things and more working together allowed man to bridge the gap and reach heaven. In some ways, as Christians, our goal is no different than Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin getting to heaven. We want to make the giant leap for mankind and reach heaven. And if we study the lunar landing, and if we read our Bible, we will learn that there is a way to do it. Again, lock it in. That's the devotional title today. There's a way to do it. I believe that Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 47, gives us a broad blueprint of practice for Christian success. It teaches us the way to do it. So let's take a look at Acts chapter 2. Starting in verse 42, it says, this is the Christians, this is the early church, this is on the day of Pentecost when the 3,000 were added to the original 120. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship. This is what the early church did. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. In verse 44 it says, all the believers were together and they had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. And in verse 47 it says, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Well, obviously the times have changed. The setting has changed, our culture has changed, things like that are different, but I believe that the general truths being written here and given to us remain the same. The general truths in this passage are eternal, and they are still relevant for us today. I believe they're also very, very applicable. So let's look at what the people were doing. Let's look at what the early church was doing. It says that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. Well, the Bible wasn't written in those days. Of course, they had the prophets, they had the Pentateuch, they had wisdom literature and things like that, but they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching as they literally spoke the Bible into existence. So what's the equivalent for us today? Well, this is Bible teaching. This is why we congregate on a Sunday morning, to hear the word. This is why we read our Bible at home. We need to be immersed in biblical instruction. So that's the first thing. Second thing, the early church, they devoted themselves to fellowship with other believers. Well, what's the equivalent for us? It's pretty much the same thing. This is why we gather on a Sunday morning. This is why we have a thing like family night, where we come in, we do Bible classes. This is why we do share groups, things like home builders. This is why we meet throughout the week in our various different home groups. We need fellowship with other believers. We need biblical teaching, and we need fellowship with other believers. Third thing, the early church, they devoted themselves to the breaking of bread. What's the equivalency for us? Well, this is communion. This is taking time to remember Christ's sacrifice, to contemplate what he did for us. This is why we take communion periodically and consistently. We take communion. And the last thing that they did is they devoted themselves to prayer. Well, what's the equivalency for us today? Prayer. Prayer equals prayer. This is why we have prayer summits. This is why we carve out time corporately for prayer in our services. This is why we encourage you to have a devotional and prayer life at home. This is why we even do things like midweek moments and different stuff like that, where we try to pray for the needs of others. The result of these four practices, biblical teaching, gathering on Sundays and throughout the week with other believers, communion, and consistent prayer, was signs and wonders. It says radical generosity, hospitality, increased devotion towards each other, praise being given to God, and the result was God-given multiplication. When God saw all that this church was doing, their love for him, their love for one another, and their desire to reach the world, God blessed the process by bringing more people into their family. So, I think as we look at all this, just as Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong didn't land on the moon by happenstance or by chance, neither does the church operate, mature, or reach our communities for Christ by accident. It doesn't just happen. Instead, we need Christ, and we need all the tools and processes he prescribed, and that includes the church. God gave us the church as a vehicle. You know, when you look through the New Testament, and I've said this before, there are no lone rangers. The church is not an optional thing. It's a God-given gift to humanity, and it's a vehicle to mature, to operate, and to reach our goal. We need the Word of God to sanctify us, to mature us, to turn us into the image of God, to renew our minds, and to teach us on how to live. We need other believers for encouragement. We need people to say, attaboy, or keep going, or you're doing a good job, or give us proper perspective. We need other believers for accountability to keep us on the right track when we maybe get a little bit slothful or lazy or unproductive. We need other believers for fellowship. We just need to be around like-minded people who love God and can do life with us. We need communion to remember what Christ has done. That is something we need to continually remind ourselves of. Otherwise, we could fall into legalism or dead religion. We need to remember what Christ has done for us. We need private as well as corporate prayer so that you can receive all that God has for you, so that you can hear his voice, pray according to his will, let your needs be known to him, have petitions and intercessions. It's a gift from God, prayer is. So in conclusion, our Christian journey should not be aimless. Instead, through intentional practices, we are guaranteed to reach our destination. It may not be the moon, but it certainly will be health within the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God. Friends, Church, there's a way to do it, and that's how you do it. I have a few announcements. Bridging our devotional into our announcements. One of the ways which you can take a step in pursuing the way to do it is by coming to Connection Sunday. Connection Sunday is this Sunday following the service. So it's September 10th, and it'll be at 11:30 p.m., and we'll be meeting in the fellowship hall. And that's the large room just beside the cafe. And what's happening at Connection Sunday is all the ministry teams, from worship to children's ministry, to various outreaches that we do, are going to have a table and a sign-up sheet, and you can go around and you can talk to the leaders and figure out what this is all about, and then you can put your name down on a list, and that's where you can contribute to this church. The church is not a building, it's people with gifts and talents being led by the Lord, right? So make sure you find a place to plug in to serve in this next ministry calendar year. It's going to be a great time, and we're going to have appetizers going around, so just enjoy some fellowship, enjoy some food, and make sure you find a place to belong. Volunteer training night will be on the following Tuesday, so September 12th at 7 p.m. It will also be in the fellowship hall. So depending on where you signed up on Connection Sunday, then on that Tuesday evening, that's where you're going to receive some training. So if you sign up for a hospitality team, what we'll do during the volunteer training night is talk about our emergency response plan in the church, just some procedures and formalities, and then we'll talk about how to be the best hospitality team you can be. Same thing with children's ministry. If you serve in that ministry, you also need to be informed about our emergency response plan, where the first aid kits are, where the muster points are, fire extinguishers, different things like that. So you'll come and meet with us in the fellowship hall, and then halfway through you'll break off and receive specialized training from Kayla. And I talked to Pastor John, and I believe the worship team's going to be meeting separately, but also at 7 p.m. on Tuesday in a different room. Another announcement is the men's kickoff breakfast. This is going to be happening on Saturday, September 16th at 9 a.m., again, in the fellowship hall. Come and have a huge, hearty breakfast. So Brad's going to be cooking up the breakfast with a team of guys, and I said, make it big and heavy. I want like a hearty breakfast. So that's what he's going to provide for us. Brent Cassian is the chaplain to the Edmonton Elks. He'll be sharing with us that morning. And then I'm going to unveil a little bit of our men's ministry plan for the year, including calendar dates of various different events and things like that. The cost for this breakfast is $15 per person. Registration is required. So don't sit back and hum and haw, just register, pay the money, and come to it. We need you there. You can sign up at Connection Sunday, or you can sign up online at the link below. Guys, I want a good showing, so please come to the kickoff breakfast, September 16th. Newcomer luncheon. If you've been at the church, if you're new to the church in the last 6 months, we want to get to know you just a little bit better. So we would like on September 17th, that's a Sunday, following the church service, so 11:30 a.m., we'll be meeting in the fellowship hall, and we would just like to invite you to come. So if you've been here for 6 months or less, come meet the pastors, have a free lunch, meet some other newcomers, and hear a little bit about our church. Again, you have to register for this, so we know how much food to order. And finally, family night begins on Tuesday, September 19th. And that includes We College, Awana, 5-6, and some various different studies in the church. I'll be leading a discipleship track study, basically how to grow as a Christian, how to develop the ability to hear from God and develop a devotional life, and kind of walk through some theology. There'll be other studies as well. So come on out, be involved, be intentional. There's a way to do it. God bless you, Park Church. We'll see you soon.